The Seattle Seahawks are 3-0, fresh off a comfortable 24-3 win over a beleaguered Miami Dolphins team. Now, the real challenge begins as Seattle enters a stretch of tough opponents. Joining me to break it all down is the Ringer's Danny Kelly. Let's light him up.
I'm Jacson Bevins, and this is Cigar Thoughts.
Welcome back to the Cigar Lounge. I am Jacson Bevins, and without my salacious producer, Mike Barwin, this is the Cigar Thoughts podcast, and it's just your boy today, but I am thrilled to have one of my closest friends joining me to break down the Seahawks' hot start at 3-0, first place in the NFC West with an unpredicted 2-game lead in the division. And look, I am so excited to have Danny here. I don't think there's very many people in the country doing a better job of synthesizing everything that's happening in the NFL than him. But before we get to that, I want to remind everyone listening that Cigar Thoughts is proud to be sponsored by Seattle Cigar Concierge and Glenfiddich Single Malt Scotch Whiskey, two companies whose products I enjoy on a regular basis. Those of you who have been with us all summer already know this, but for those of you who are just joining or rejoining, we have teamed back up with Seattle Cigar Concierge for an exciting second release of the Cigar Thoughts cigars. It is the Cigar Thoughts Red Zone series, which combines the same robust taste profile that you're used to with the Cigar Thoughts originals, except now it's got a lighter Connecticut wrapper, and it is available to purchase using the link on the show page for the same discounted price of $149 for a bundle of 10 stogies. My goal with these releases is to provide an avenue to high-end cigars without the high-end cost, and this partnership provides exactly that. The feedback on these stogies has been excellent so far, and we'd love yours as well. They also make a great gift, so get some for yourself or for someone else by following the link at cigarthoughtsnfl.com. Mike and I love doing this show, and there are two ways y'all listening and watching can help support it so that we can keep the episodes coming. One is by purchasing the cigars, which again, come at a fantastic price for the quality. The other is by subscribing to our YouTube channel at Cigar Thoughts, where you can watch full episodes as well as the funny and insightful clips that Mike puts together. Give a thumbs up to the stuff you like and let us know what you think in the comments. And of course, you can listen to us everywhere you get your podcasts. Now, I am thrilled for today's show. Obviously, so fun to talk about the Seahawks when they're 3-0. That doesn't happen all the time. But even if they weren't, I would be looking forward to today because I am joined by one of the smartest people covering the NFL. Many of you are familiar with his work already, and I am privileged to call him one of my best friends. He is a senior NFL writer for The Ringer and one of the co-hosts of The Ringer Fantasy Football Podcast. He is Danny Kelly. Danny, what's happening, man?
What's up? How's it going, man?
It's good. It's good. You know, it's so funny. I was talking with people in the office today and, you know, everyone wants to talk Seahawks after a win and there's still like trepidation. There's still a lot of like, yeah, but going on. And
Sure.
I've always been in the camp that wins are wins. This isn't college football. You're not trying to impress voters. They're hard to get and they all spend the same when the playoffs come around. But it is fair to say that they've had probably the easiest path through their first 3 games of any team in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obvious. They've gotten the advantage of facing either young or bad quarterbacks. But I mean, at the end of the day, what they're doing in a dominant fashion, especially on defense so far, is like really, really encouraging. You know, I think I saw a stat and I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it was basically like what the defense has done through 3 games in terms of like the yardage that they've given up each game is one of the best starts since like 1979, the 1979 Steelers.
I tweeted that out last night. They're the first team to start 3-0 and not allow a single opponent to pass for 150 yards
there you go.
Since the 79 Steelers.
That's a lot of seasons and a lot of iterations. You know, there's 32 teams every season, so like that's a pretty meaningful, I think, stat. Even though they've faced bad quarterbacks, like they're doing it at the like one of the best rates that you can imagine, like going back to like 50 something years. And so
that's That's over 1,400 separate seasons.
Yeah. So, I mean,
since that's happened.
I understand that, yeah, bad quarterbacks and they've gotten lucky, but they've absolutely dominated those quarterbacks. And so you have to be really encouraged with that. Like, they can only play who they're going to play that week. And they've done a really good job of, stifling the opposing offenses. I think the Seahawks offense too is shown some really nice flashes. There's still a lot of meat on the bone, I think, with the offense. And so, I'm nothing but encouraged basically by what I've seen. Like you said it before, it's like they're not trying to impress some committee or some really in-depth, way to get into the playoffs. Like, wins matter, and getting wins when you can get them is really important because there's going to be ups and downs throughout a season. So yeah, I'm feeling really, really good about where the Seahawks are after 3 games, obviously.
Yeah. And I mean, also, it's not like there haven't been style points. This right. Isn't the Steelers grinding out 18-12 wins every single game. Like, yeah, first one was sort of close. It was technically a 1-score game that really felt more like a 2-score game in the second half. Obviously, the second game goes to overtime, and then this was a 3-touchdown win. But you've had 70-plus yard touchdown passes each of the last 2 games. You're seeing sacks and turnovers from this defense. You're seeing pop plays from this team in pretty much every aspect. You've got Geno probably playing the best football of his career right now, and it's something where it's like, look, yeah, you beat the teams that are in front of you, and sure, they probably should be 3-0, but betting favorites have lost 40% of their games already this season.
Yeah.
And even though Seattle's been favored in each of their 3 games, they've lost 0% of those games. And ask Raiders fans how they felt going into playing the Panthers yesterday. Ask the Bengals fans how they felt going into playing the Patriots on opening day. Ask Bucs fans going into the game against the Broncos yesterday how confident they were feeling. Like, this stuff happens all the time. The Texans got obliterated by the Vikings. So, yeah, I mean, wins are hard. Everyone in the NFL is good, except for maybe Skylar Thompson. And that's what you got.
Yeah, and look, I saw this stat from Ben Fox the other day that said NFL underdogs of 5.5 points or more are 13-2 against the spread with 9 outright wins, 4 of them yesterday, 4-0 yesterday. So that was like the biggest underdogs are actually just winning outright.
That's insane.
It's the cliche at any given Sunday. It's so true. Like, it's so hard to win in the NFL, especially when offenses are doing so poorly like they're doing right now. Like, we're seeing an absolute, not historic, but for recent history, a pretty historically bad offense so far through 3 weeks in terms of what the number of touchdowns. Teams are kicking field goals at like a higher rate than ever before. So I don't know. It's just like the NFL is weird this year. This football is weird this year, and you have to like appreciate the Seahawks have won all their games.
100%. I mean, there's 31 other teams, and 28 of them have losses. Like this, they are starting to get into that rare air, and of course, they're going to have their first real test from a contender class opponent this upcoming week, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But you tweeted out something even before yesterday's games. It was at some point last week, and maybe you recall what the exact numbers were, but I think you were saying through 2 weeks, this is the fewest points since like 2005, the fewest yards since 2007, something like that. And when, there's this adage that when you're an underdog, you want to shrink the game, right? Because you're the more plays that you run, if you're a better team, chances are the outcome just almost exponentially grows in your favor.
Right.
But the fewer the plays and the fewer total points that get scored, the higher the variance and the more impact each score has. And we're seeing that. It's like every team in the NFL is playing like they're trying to shorten the game. And so when we're seeing all these games that might have 2 or 3 total touchdowns scored in them, yeah, I mean, one of those goes the other way, it's totally different. So yeah, man, it's like upsets are a real thing, and it's made it tough. I mean, you are obviously a very well-versed, very knowledgeable football fan, and that's reflected in the writing you do for The Ringer and your draft guide and all of that. But you also are a fantasy football podcast host, a fantasy football enthusiast. And you and I were joking before the show, man, it's just been brutal on the fantasy side this year.
I know. I was joking with a buddy earlier today. I was like, yeah, it was a weird week. In week 3, all my good teams were bad, and all my bad teams were also bad. It's like the fantasy like expectations of what like all the guys that we thought were going to be the superstars so far, in a lot of cases are absolutely just been crushed so far.
Yes.
And then vice versa. Like, and we've seen like a few outlier performances from a handful of guys so far that have like won people weeks. Like this week it was Juwan Jennings. He's like the overall wide receiver 3 through 3 weeks just because of like what he did on one Sunday. So there's a lot of variance. It's kind of like what you're saying where on a long enough timeline, like the best teams will win more often than not. But right now, I think we're just seeing a lot of variance in the NFL and a lot of variance in fantasy. Offenses just all over the place. And so, yeah, scores are down. It just feels it's like been a really weird, almost like a false start feeling type of of season. Like it's like we're still in preseason kind of.
I was just going to ask you, are the last 2 NFL seasons, last 2 NFL Septembers, are they an argument for playing your starters more in the preseason? Because we are just seeing rust. Like we're seeing bad execution. We're seeing tons of penalties, sloppy play, guys dropping handoffs. Like the stuff that you iron out, it still needs to get ironed out at full speed. And that is what the preseason is for. I feel like growing up, and I get it, no coach wants to be the one that got, one of their best players hurt in the preseason in a quote unquote meaningless game. But like, how big of a difference is it if they get hurt in the preseason or they get hurt in the second quarter of week 1?
Yeah.
Right. Like, get these boys ready to play. It's kind of my thought. And I feel like, up until very recently, there was at least one game where you're like, the starters are going to play the first half and they might play into the third quarter because these are the guys that are going to be getting 90+% of the snaps once it starts counting.
Yeah. And I think, it would be interesting, like statistically to look at, how big of an impact not playing your starters works in the preseason versus like just letting them play, because it feels like we've seen an absolute ton of soft tissue injuries in the beginning of the season. Like multiple big name stars are already out. Like Christian McCaffrey's going to Germany today to figure out what's going on with his Achilles. I wonder if there'd be like an argument that actually getting these guys out and running full speed earlier is going to help them as the season progresses, because I feel like if you don't really run full speed in the preseason at all, and then you're trying to like do it in a real game, like it's kind of shocking your system, shocking your muscles. So I don't know. That's just a theory, but it'd be interesting to look at the stats for that.
It shows up every year. I mean, like a microcosm of that is when we see players who hold out, right? And then they sign that final deadline deal right before the season starts to get out on the field. Nick Bosa did it last year, and he was coming off being arguably the best defensive player on the planet the previous season, and he was not that. And he was actually kind of invisible for like a month last year. We're seeing it with CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Ayuk right now. Jamar Chase. Like, these are guys that you're like, oh, they're the best in the world at what they do. They can just step in and figure it out. But I think it's so important to be simulating real game activity as much as you can in as safe a way as you can. But, you and I are both, we're fine with almost all of the player protection rules that have come in. We're fine with, the ticky-tack quarterback stuff, whatever. Because you lose a starting quarterback, you lose a city for the NFL.
Just like makes the product worse too,
That's what I'm saying, right? Like, and so if Mahomes goes down and it's Carson Wentz for 2 months, like that's a huge hit to the NFL.
Yeah, that sucks.
And so, I'm for it, but one of the things that has come from this new CBA is guys, they don't really hit in practice. There's limits on truly how much time on the practice field you get. And I think that's very good in a lot of ways because, the old school NFL players just got so chewed up.
Yeah.
But at some point, you got to play football before it's time to actually play football.
Yeah, it's true. And I think, there's a lot of other variables. I think that's one variable that's kind of like there's a confluence of multiple big picture meta variables that are kind of like all happening at the same time. Like we've got a bunch of, truly like Hall of Fame level quarterbacks over the last like 5 or 8 years have kind of aged out and retired from the NFL. Mm-hmm. And I think the NFL has struggled to replace them with anybody that's even remotely close to what they were being able to bring to an offense week in and week out, and like just the consistency that those guys brought to the NFL every year for a decade plus. And so there's that. I think when you talk about all the different issues that players are having developing in terms of going from the college game to the pros, you're seeing offensive linemen really struggle, I think, relative to what they used to based on the way that the college game is going. Like basically now teams are just drafting guys that are good athletes and hoping they'll get good at blocking, essentially, and you have guys and going through the draft process, you have like left tackles that have very few actual real like pass sets, like the style that you would see in the NFL, because the game is just very different, relative to the NFL. And so I don't know. It's just like there's a million different small variables that are mixed in with like the lack of playing time, the lack of full speed stuff that's happening in the preseason that I think is like made the game, made the product of the game like just a little bit worse gradually over the years. And like, last year offense was really down, and then this year offense is down a lot from last year. And I think it's just like, starts with the quarterback, but there's offensive line issues. There's, people have been talking. I don't really know enough, to be honest, about it to like have a strong opinion on it. But like people are talking about like coaching is not as good as it used to be, and so I don't know. It's just there's a lot of different variables kind of coming into play here, and I don't think there's like one easy fix really right now.
No, you touched on a couple of things that I think are really important and kind of flying under the radar a little bit within the football discourse. And I promise those of y'all listening, we're going to get to the Seahawks here, but anytime I get Danny on, man, it's nice to just talk about the league and talk about football and the sport. And one of the things is you mentioned the college game. They have wider hash marks. Look at the splits between offensive linemen in an average college game. I mean, yeah. I know this. You're scouting all of these guys. You're writing detailed reports. And when you're a yard and a half away from the nearest lineman for 1,000 snaps in college, and then all of a sudden it's like, no, actually the outside of your foot is almost touching the outside of the foot of the guy next to you. That's totally different, learning how to work in that space. And like, we're seeing it every game, linemen running into each other, because that's not something that like is possible in college with the splits that they run. As a result of these big splits, you see it with quarterbacks. They have passing lanes with those wider hash marks in college that don't exist in the NFL. And it's why we're seeing almost a death of throwing over the middle, except for these like older experienced quarterbacks. Yeah. So you have all of that. And then you mentioned coaching. Coaching isn't as good. I can't sit here and say whether or not that's true. I know that we have a lot more tools to criticize coaching now than we used to do.
Right.
But also, you and I have talked about this, and I've talked about this on the show. If you're halfway competent, you're not sticking around. There is one offensive coordinator in the NFL that was the offensive coordinator for the same team 2 seasons ago.
It's wild.
And it's Ben Johnson in Detroit, and it's only because he turned down a head coaching offer from the Commanders. So these players are learning new systems constantly also. And it makes for a rough situation. And Seattle's had to deal with that brand new coaching and new offensive linemen and pretty massive turnover on the defensive side. But they look competent. They look coherent. They look prepared, man. That's, I think, the thing that has been the most pleasant surprise for me. It's not even scheme related stuff. And I love what Grubb's doing on offense. I obviously love what McDonald's doing on defense, but for the most part, these guys look like they're pretty comfortable in their new environment already.
Yeah. And I think the big, I guess, thing, the idea that I like the most about McDonald so far and what he's brought to the team, and like listening to his interviews and listening to like people that have, worked with him or played for him before. I think the thing that always comes to mind is like detail oriented, and he's like very, very detail oriented, and just has a really very specific plan for everything. Like I just trust that he kind of like isn't just winging it. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
honestly, like it's funny that would even be a worry, but like we've seen it time and time again. Like some of these coaches just come in and they just aren't prepared for like the amount of stuff that they have to be prepared for, like that they have to know, game management, strategy, coaching management, like time, like just everything that goes into being a head coach. It's so different from being a coordinator. And so I think it's been really impressive to see how he's like just managing all the details so far that it seems like is really necessary. And so, that's the big picture thing. I think there's still obviously a lot of time for him to prove like what he is in terms of a coach, and McDonald is, but like, so far the early returns to me are really just encouraging. I just like his style. It's a very very different contrasting style of Pete Carroll, and obviously Pete Carroll had a ton of strengths too. But it's like, it's like when you break up with someone, you date someone that's really different. Like he just feels very different in so many ways. Like he's so detail oriented. He's very serious. He's not animated on the sideline. There's just a lot of differences, and it's kind of like refreshing in a way, because I think, like a lot of Seahawks fans, it just like felt like the Seahawks needed a big change coming out of the last couple of seasons for multiple reasons. It's just, it's fun to watch this team because it's got a very different feel to it now.
Yeah, it's crazy. You had the oldest coach in the NFL who coached like the youngest coach in the NFL.
Right.
And now you've got the youngest coach in the NFL coaching like one of the older coaches.
Hard ass, yeah.
And it's like it's hard ass with love though, right? Like he's not beating up his players. He's not making them feel shitty, but he's doesn't have time for the bullshit either. And I think that's a big Leslie Frazier influence. Mike McDonald is big on crediting Leslie Frazier for basically being his devil's advocate. And Leslie Frazier has been a head coach before. He can coach McDonald up on what that is. We've talked so much about bringing in Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff, but bringing in Leslie Frazier to essentially be his head coach coordinator is so valuable. And he's quick to give credit to everybody, which I appreciate too. But he's also, to your point, he's detail oriented, and I think that's because when we talk about coaching trees, we talk about schemes, right? It's a Walsh scheme, it's a Fangio scheme, it's Shanahan, it's McVay, and that's great. When it comes to actually coaching an NFL team, I don't think there's a tree I want my guy coming out of more than the Harbaughs.
Right.
Like those guys run a program button tight, top to bottom. They've seen it all. Like it's something that I appreciate.
Yeah, 100%. It is interesting. He's now coached for both of the Harbaugh brothers. And so, yeah, I mean, the point you made about Leslie Frazier, I think is so apt, and kind of like got to exactly what I was trying to make a point on, is like, he thought ahead to like get a guy in who's going to help him figure out all the crap that he doesn't realize, like the stuff he doesn't know right. about being a head coach.
Yeah.
And I think I love that about him. He just seems like really smart. I guess like the simplest way of putting it is he seems really smart, and I like really appreciate the style of coaching that he's bringing so far. And again, like obviously the results have been good so far. They're going to face some much tougher battles in terms of the quarterbacks they face going forward, but it feels like already he's done a really good job of getting the most out of the players that they have on defense, and like, setting his players up for success, not asking them to do things that they're not going to be good at, and putting them in positions where they can make plays, like Derek Hall, Boye Mafe, both look really good so far. It seems like he's unlocked them to an extent. And I think I'm just like, again, really encouraged. I just think he's a really smart guy, and I can't wait to see like where this goes as the year goes on.
Yeah. And I mean, look, the world is full of really smart, really qualified people who struggle with conveying their knowledge in a way that's easily receivable, right? And easily implementable. And McDonald seems so far to have, I mean, everything seems good when you've won your first 3 games. Josh McDaniels won his first 6 games as a head coach. And that guy's like the definition
That's
of a donkey.
Reality
so
check. Yeah.
It's like, I'm not, let's see what happens when they lose 3 games in a row. Maybe it all starts to fall apart. And because there are going to be stretches where they don't look very good.
Yeah.
And that'll be really interesting to see. But to your point about unlocking these guys, I think it's I think that's such a valuable skill set in coaching, and maybe we don't talk about it enough because we can't really quantify it. But I saw this interview recently with Mike Tomlin, who is, he's on my Mount Rushmore of current NFL coaches for sure. Mm-hmm. And he was talking with Ryan Clark, and he was talking about bringing in guys, and the way he put it is, I don't run from the coaching. I run to the coaching. And what he meant was, we see all of these guys coming out of college or coming from other teams, and it's like, okay, yeah, they've got these skills, but their footwork is bad, or they're not precise with their hands. He's like, that's not a skill issue. That's a coaching issue.
Yeah.
And he has so much faith in his ability to do that. And that is what I am feeling from Mike McDonald. Again, we'll see it. But I mean, Reek Woolen is in the top right quadrant of every single cornerback metric that comes out, and Devin Witherspoon's right behind him, and Trey Brown is right behind him. Like we've known these guys have the talent, but it's so exciting to see that get maximized. And this week and many weeks in the future will be huge tests of that for sure. But they're playing well in that sense. Stepping away from kind of the philosophical stuff, zeroing in on what we've seen on the field. Mm-hmm. What do you feel like the biggest difference is between the Seahawks of the last 2-3 years and what we've seen so far?
So far, and again, this is a huge caveat, but the defense just looks so much better. Like the ability to generate pressure, what they're doing, the way that they're it seems as though they've been confusing opposing, quarterbacks. I think that to me has been the biggest difference from the Seahawks of the last few years. It just hasn't felt like the Seahawks defense has had any teeth for, I don't even know. It's been a while. It's been a surprisingly long time. 2017, 2018, when I've been felt really confident in the Seahawks and their run defense. I know that they gave up a lot of yards to New England in terms of the ground game, but I just have more confidence that the Seahawks are going to play disciplined and be in their lanes and are doing the things that they're supposed to be doing. I think that's been just based on feel and my watching of the games, it's the defense I have just so much more confidence in. And again, that's a huge caveat because they played crappy quarterbacks, but again, you just have to dominate the guys in front of you. If you're playing a bad team, hopefully you dominate, and they've done that so far in terms of the defense. And so the biggest difference to me is I've been really encouraged. I'm looking at the PFF grades for the Seahawks defense right now, and almost all their starters are a 70 or above, so a green color, 65 or above. And you got a couple guys here and there where it's yellow. Draymond Jones, I guess he's not been graded super well so far, but basically all their starters have looked really good. And I feel like that's just a big difference in terms of what we've seen over the last few years. That to me is the biggest difference. Just the feel of the defense, how they're rallying to the football, the intensity that they're playing with, the detail that they're playing with, the discipline that they're playing with. It just feels a little different. So I'd say that's the biggest change, at least over the last few years. Obviously, Pete Carroll's defenses in the 2012, 2014, 2015 era were really, really good too, but just haven't seen that in a while.
Yeah. And I couldn't agree more. And, we tend to think of, or at least I do, maybe you don't, but I think a lot of folks, when they hear discipline, it almost feels boring, right? But Mike McDonald said something in his press conference today that I think is going to stick with me for a long time. He said there is freedom in discipline. And when you are disciplined and you've got the fundamentals right, it gives you freedom to go out and attack. And that's what we're seeing, because this is not a timid defense. These corners are loud and they are getting personal foul penalties or getting yanked away from personal foul penalties on every drive. And that's got some LOB vibes to it, where it's okay, we might be getting to the point where at least we can envision the possibility where there's so much trust in these guys to play on the edge that you take the occasional penalties. Why I don't have a problem with DK Metcalf's most of his penalties. He's playing on the absolute edge all the time. You're going to get flagged sometimes, especially in this NFL. I mean, we saw 32 flags get thrown in the game yesterday, 22 accepted penalties. That's going to happen. I think for me, the biggest difference that I'm seeing is how the offense is accounting for poor blocking, because the offensive line hasn't gotten better. Charles Cross has been exceptional. Coming into this last game, he hadn't allowed a single pressure. He was PFF's number 1 graded left tackle, which is insane. He did get beat at least once in this past game, but he's been playing great. Everyone else has been terrible. And they're doing stuff that is still allowing Geno Smith to lead the NFL in completion percentage. And completion percentage can be a misleading stat. Jimmy Garoppolo led the NFL in that 1 year. But he's not doing it with a low ADOT. He is pushing the ball down the field. He's top 10 in yards per attempt. Like, he's attacking with bad protection and still getting down the field. And it's not just because Geno has the balls to do it. It's because there are route concepts in play that allow him to push the ball downfield even when there's pressure. And we're seeing layering that I haven't seen from Seattle, maybe ever. I mean, I'm talking Bevel, Schottenheimer, Waldron, and there was a play in the Patriots game where DK Metcalf ran like a true mid-level crossing route. He got 7 yards upfield and cut straight across the field against a zone, which he's never done. Like, he's run some slants, but this was a true crosser. And when you're a wide receiver and you're running a true hash mark to sideline crossing route against zone defense, you are having to identify what the responsibilities are of each zone that you cross. Like, it seems simple. Like, if you watch the moving dots on the screen, it seems like a very simple route, but to execute it properly requires a lot of faith in that receiver to know how to adjust that route if necessary, and faith in the quarterback to read and react to that. And we're seeing that. And it feels like you used the word unlocked earlier. I think it's perfect. It feels like DK Metcalf is being unlocked, and
I know
he's like their nuclear
exciting.
option.
Yeah, that's like one of the most exciting parts on offense is like, oh, we're seeing like a consistent, more consistent look from DK Metcalf. Like, DK Metcalf was always more than capable of like eruption games. You know what I mean? Like, he's a big play threat. He's extremely talented, extremely explosive, but we're starting to see more consistency and like a more focused usage for him. And that's like really, really exciting. And you kind of stole like the thought out of my mind when you were just like talking about the passing game and like what we've seen so far from Geno and the way that they're designing this offense. I was going back and watching some of the tape this morning, and just anecdotally, I remember a play where they ran, it was like a 3 receivers went out. It was DK, JSN, and Lockett, and they basically ran like a 3-level thing where each guy ran kind of like across the field on like a deep crosser, deep slant, and at different levels. And there was a point where Lockett realized that he was running into a zone, and he was going to be running into coverage because he's going on the far side in the mid-level of the field, and he just stopped his route and settled into this open zone, and Geno found him like almost immediately. And I was like, ooh, that was a good route. And I just remember thinking, like, Lockett, obviously we make fun of him for like falling down immediately after catching the football, but it's like so nice having a guy he's so good at the details. He's such a smart receiver, such a skilled receiver in terms of like getting his feet down and knowing exactly where to settle in a zone. He's just so good. And so I just remember that was like one anecdote of like what I was watching with the Seahawks passing game today. It was just like they were running this 3-level thing, and it didn't look like anyone was going to get open, but then Lockett just like figured out where the soft spot was. He stopped, and then it was like wide open. So obviously there's still a lot to learn from this offense and figure out like exactly what they are. I think they've been a little bit different each game. But again, a really encouraging start. Geno's looked really good. I think, obviously a couple picks here and there in this last game that I didn't think were really his fault. They got tipped at the line of scrimmage. But he's very aggressive. He's been pushing the ball down the field. That play, the touchdown throw to DK Metcalf was a beauty one too. By the way, it was like DK Metcalf ran like a fake slant. It was like a sluggo route where he just like stepped one step hard into the middle of the field, got the safety to bite, and then he just took it vertical. And Geno Smith had the balls like wait long enough to let the play develop and let it fly. By the way, I think Charles Cross on that play had like a really, really good like extended block on the edge.
Yes, he had to carry his guy. The guy was coming right to the top of Geno's drop back.
Yeah, and
he was able to carry him past. And it's not just as simple as like redirecting the guy. You have to redirect him so much that there's room for you in between the defender and your quarterback.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, that's a great call out there. Yeah, they've done a couple things. You know, I've told this story on this show before, but I think it's apt to what you were talking about with Tyler Lockett. When I first met Michael Bumpus, it was at a Seahawks practice. Mm-hmm. It would have been going in DK's second year, and we grabbed lunch afterwards. And, you know, I was talking to him about the difference between what separates a receiver that makes it in the NFL and one that doesn't.
Ooh,
that's I was expecting it to be like a technical answer. And his answer was, do they have a plan B? Because he goes, a lot of times you run your route, you get 3 steps into it, and the defense isn't doing what you want them to do.
Right.
Do you have a plan B? How quickly can you identify that and move to a plan B? I asked him who the best he had ever seen at it was. He said Doug Baldwin. I asked him to rate Tyler Lockett 1 to 10. He said 9.8. Said, where's DK? And he's like, DK's like a 6. And now we're starting to see more of that stuff from Lockett. Obviously still has it. He's got the wile of someone that's been in the league for 9 years, 10 years, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But DK had a catch that, you know, on the score sheet, it was like 12 yards. It wasn't like a huge play. It was so cool. I've never seen him do it before.
Talk about the sideline play.
What's that?
Are you talking about the sideline catch where he caught it?
No, that was sick. That was just DK being a phenomenal athlete and showing some softness in his hands at the catch point that he's lacked too. That has been my biggest frustration with him. No, it was a play in the third quarter, and he's on the left side. And he ran up about 10 yards and turned in almost like he was going to set a phantom pick. He was like almost in screen position. And then instead of setting the screen, so to speak, he just turned around and the ball was like in his hands. It was a decoy move that totally opened up, like the defender that was coming across ran right by him because he was thinking that DK was trying to get in his way. DK just turned around, caught it, easy first down. It's like, this is cool stuff. This feels imaginative. This feels like an offense that is willing to push the envelope and not just try and out-execute you.
Yeah, the reason I brought up that sideline catch is I thought that that was going to be what you were getting to, because on that play, basically he was running like a stop route, just like basically holding a defender kind of like in his area. I don't think he was going to be one of the primary reads on that at all. Basically, they snapped the ball. He kind of ran 2 feet forward and then stopped. And then he saw, Geno saw pressure. I think there was pressure from the inside. The guard gave up a pressure, which is pretty common, unfortunately. And it became a scramble drill play. And DK Metcalf saw Geno come out of the pocket towards him. He broke up the sideline, and Geno threw the ball like it was an amazing throw by Geno. Like it was so much anticipation because he threw the ball, you know, way before DK Metcalf was, and he was never really open, honestly, but he threw the ball way before DK Metcalf really committed to where he was going. And basically it was just one of those special plays where Metcalf saw that it was scramble drill. He got upfield, went up the sideline, and Geno put it right on him. And that was the play where he basically caught it, like, and then held the ball behind his back while he stepped out of bounds. It was like, I thought that was another great example of, you know, him maturing and getting a little bit better at some of the nuanced details of playing receiver. Like he saw that the play had broken down and made a play and got a first down out of it. And so, again, just super excited about like where this is going. I think JSN, you know, his emergence last week against the Patriots was really, really exciting. Just like some of the easy button stuff that he can do and bring to that offense. You know, he didn't do a ton in this last game, but like I think he's going to have some massive games this season just because of the stuff he can do in the short and intermediate area. Yeah, and this you know, Seattle's offense has for a long time been a funnel offense, and it's your top 2 target getters are going to see a lot of games, 50% of the targets in a given game, and it's clear that DK Metcalf is a focal point. It's
It's obvious in how defenses shade him that he is the focal point on both sides of the ball. And I feel like until JSN really emerges from his cocoon, and we're starting to see it, it's just going to be kind of game to game who that other guy is. It was Lockett in the first game. It was Smith and Jigba in the second game. It was Noah Fant in this game.
I was going to say that was super encouraging because the first couple of games I was like, Fant looks kind of slow. Like, what's going on with this? I was starting to get a little bit worried, but he looked a little more explosive. And by the way, I think Charbonnet looked a lot better.
I'm so glad he was going to be the next guy I asked you about.
Yeah, I was like, against the Patriots, again, they have a very strong run defense, and he didn't really get much going. But I saw this. He had like a 14% success rate in that game, which was one of the worst on the week. And I was like, he just like sucked in that game. I'm sorry. He was really bad. And in this last game, he looked night and day better, so much better. I don't know what the difference was. Obviously helped to have not quite as good of a defense to go against, but he just looked more explosive. He looked more decisive, a little more like versatile, and just not so straight line-ish, I think, because he was just run forward and bang into the offensive line, I felt like, in week 2. And I was like, man, we need to get Kenneth Walker back like stat, because this is not going to work. But he looked a lot better in week 3. So I think both Fant and Charbonnet bring in like, some good old fashioned like role playing. You know what I mean? Like we just need some role players that are going to like perform when they get their number called. They're not going to be like superstars. They're not going to put up big numbers, but when they get their number called, at least do something and contribute to the effort. It was really good to see both of those guys do that, because I came out of week 2 being kind of discouraged about those two in particular. So again, long season. I think Noah Fant's been nursing some injuries, I believe. So like maybe that was why he didn't look quite as fast to start the season, but he looked a lot better in this game. Yeah,
I'm so glad you mentioned Charbonnet. I mean, I think you and I share the opinion that Ken Walker is a special runner of the football. He has deficiencies in his game, but the things he does well, he does at an elite level. And I was so encouraged to see that second touchdown from Charbonnet, the one that put the game away. That was a Kenneth Walker-esque run where he was quick enough to hit the gap between the right tackle and the right guard. And then he bounced off of that second level defender and won a race to the pylon. And that's not something that I've really considered to be in Charbonnet's skill set. I wrote about this last night. This is Ken Walker's backfield when they're both healthy, I think. But when Charbonnet is called upon, he does something that's very different. And maybe it's not quite as valuable, but it's the stuff that I think coaches really like, because Ken Walker, all the buttons on the controller are available to him when he has the ball in his hands. And that's not the case for Charbonnet. But Charbonnet does this cool thing where when he's got a tackler coming up, he doesn't try and juke him. He just slightly alters his trajectory so that he makes contact with that person and keeps moving forward. And he makes it more of a deflecting hit than a straight on hit. And we saw that over and over and over again. I mean, this guy has had like 92% of the running back touches in the last 2 games. And he does all of the things that coaches like. On top of that stuff, he's going to get what's blocked for him. He's not going to lose yards unnecessarily. He's very adept at identifying the free rusher, which is something that as fans, I don't think we really care about that much, but that coaches care about a lot. He's going to catch everything that gets thrown to him.
Yeah, like he's a pretty good pass catcher. Like he's just reliable in that area.
He reminds me of, and this is like a top tier, if he hits his ceiling, but style wise, he reminds me of D'Angelo Williams a lot in that he seems like the kind of guy that can have like a Carlos Hyde, Gus Edwards, Mark Ingram, Latavius Murray type career where there's always going to be a room for him on a roster because he's going to do all of the stuff that coaches need you to do. And we've seen so many, as fantasy players, we get so frustrated when Khalil Herbert's not getting, 60 snaps a game because look at his EPA per rush and all of these things. And it's like, well, he can't catch and he can't block. And like, you can't have that guy out there a whole bunch. Right. And so it's that hidden stuff that I think Charbonnet does well.
Sure. Agreed.
We still got to get Ken Walker back to unlock this offense, though.
Yeah. I think the thing with Charbonnet is I agree with everything you said. The guy that he kind of reminds me a little bit of is Leonard Fournette, where
I almost mentioned it.
Yeah, I used to like joke around about how Leonard Fournette is like a bumper car. You remember how bumper cars, when you're steering them, they like kind of steer funky and they'll whip around all of a sudden and like, but like generally speaking, they're just like straight ahead and he kind of has that style where he's just like, I'm going to go through you rather than around you. But what you said about the glancing blows instead of trying to like run directly through a player is so true. And why he has such good contact balance is because he turns what should be a head on into like a glancing, deflecting hit. And so I think, he brings a toughness, he brings physicality, he brings an attitude. Like I remember like talking about him last year in the preseason, like he's an absolute maniac. Just wants contact, feeds off of it. He loves it. And I think that kind of permeates the offense. So that kind of stuff is great. I think it's a very valuable thing to have on an offense. But, Kenneth Walker is so much more creative, so much more. He can turn nothing into something. He can turn nothing into like a home run play. Yeah. And so I really want like the combination of both of them is really, really exciting because they both bring like a very different style to the offense. And I'm guessing as Kenneth Walker comes back, they'll start to use a little bit more of a mix because early on it was basically just all Kenneth Walker. But it's good to see him. It's good to see Charbonnet getting in there and getting some confidence and getting into a rhythm. Obviously, he's been really productive the last 2 weeks. And so, yeah, I mean, I understand the pick a little bit more in retrospect because like if Walker gets hurt, they don't want to like lose their run game. They don't want to have to like go to like, super high volume passing offense if the matchup doesn't really dictate that. So overall, again, super encouraged by Charbonnet in this last game because I was feeling pretty down about him after week 2.
Yeah, and for good reason, and this was Charbonnet's best game as a pro, and that stuff matters. Confidence matters so much to these guys, and to have a game where it's just like, hey, we're up 17-3. We just had a bad turnover in our own red zone. Defense does their job, doesn't give up any points, but you're on your own too. And it was just Charbonnet all the way down the field. Yeah. He had almost 60 yards on that drive and put the game away. Like that's the kind of stuff that not only builds confidence in yourself as a young football player, but it builds confidence in your teammates in you. And that is where I think the exponential factor really starts to come in is when the rest of the guys are like, yeah, this is that dude. And it feels like Charbonnet's getting there. I do want to talk about the Lions here in a second, but we should talk about this offensive line a little bit. You do such a remarkable job when you scout offensive linemen. Is this just a skill issue when you look at these guys? Like they just not have the dudes outside of Charles Cross? Or are you seeing some traits there that's like, all right, once they get coached up, they should be better?
I don't know. Honestly, like I would need to study the offensive line like really, really closely, I think, to answer that question like intelligently. I would say I loved Charles Cross coming out. Like that I feel pretty confident talking about. Like he was one of my favorite tackles in that class. Like the feet, the length, his athleticism, his toughness. And so it was a little discouraging last year when he, I think there was sort of the impression that he wasn't playing as well as he could or everyone expected him to. And so it's really cool to see him come out. And he's like, right now he's PFF's #1 rated left tackle, or tackle in general. And so
it's insane because the left tackle is the baddest dude on almost every football team. Yeah. And to be one of the elites there is really remarkable.
So yeah, I mean, I'd say that in particular, I think is really important. You can kind of figure out the rest of the line from there. I think Christian Haynes, sorry, I'm blanking. Is that the right name?
Yep.
For the guard that they drafted in the 3rd round, he was one of my guys coming into this draft. I thought, he was like big, powerful, like one of the heavier guards in the draft. I think he has the potential to be really good for them. I'm not quite sure like what they're seeing right now. Like it feels to me like Bradford has, every time I look up, he's like making a mistake, making a penalty, letting a guy into the pocket. So I don't know exactly what's going on with Haynes and like how long it's going to take him to get in there. But I think I saw something on Twitter today talking about how he might get an opportunity to finally like get in there and go. And I would love to see that because he was one of my guys in this last draft period. Obviously I thought he would be like a third rounder, so not like, one of my top guys, but I just really liked his game. He plays really ferociously, but he's athletic and he is really experienced. Like he has a ton of starts under his belt. So I don't know. I'd be excited to see kind of like what happens going forward. Because I don't have like a ton of confidence what I've seen from the two guards thus far. So, but maybe they're just trying to like feel it out, figure out who the best 5 guys are as the season goes along. It's a process, I think, for the coaching staff, and they just probably went with like the experienced guy to start out the year.
Yeah. There's a couple of quotes from the last 24 hours. You mentioned it just now. Mike McDonald did say like they're going to start trying to look for ways to give Christian Haynes an opportunity, which is great. I was on Mitch Levy's podcast last night after the game with Brady Henderson from ESPN, and we were talking about Bradford because I think he leads the NFL in penalties. He is not.
It's like every time you look up, it's like, he's getting called for something. It's like so frustrating, but yeah.
Totally. So that's what we were talking about. And I asked Brady this last night, what is it saying? Is Bradford really like playing well in practice and then just struggling in the game? Or is Christian Haynes just not there yet? And Brady said essentially the fact that Anthony Bradford is still out there kind of answers that question, that Haynes isn't ready. And look, we want every rookie to step in and be an impact player right away. The truth of the matter is, league wide, you might get like 40 rookies across all positions that come in and are like impact players their first year. So the guy that's being drafted, whatever they took him 100th overall or 90th overall, somewhere in there, it's like, yeah, it makes sense that they're going to be developmental. So yeah, I think that's something that I'm looking for at some point. If you go a month of being one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL, just fail different. Like if you're going to fail different.
The only way to go up from here is up, right? Or the only way to go from here is up. And so, yeah, because I think they've had one of the worst interior offensive lines thus far. So yeah, I think that's like the one thing I kind of really worry about with the offense is just how quickly sometimes the pressure is arriving. And I have this nagging thought in the back of my head, like we got to keep Geno healthy. So obviously, that's a big deal, but you can only play with the guys you got. This is no surprise really. Like most places I saw coming into the season had the Seahawks ranked as like a bottom 3 offensive line. So, again, I'm very happy to see what they're getting from Charles Cross. Like having like that foundational piece on the left is a huge step forward. And hopefully they can piece it together as the season goes along and just get a little bit better. Even like average would be totally fine. Even like 20th would be like a pretty big improvement. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Geno's second in the NFL in passing yards behind this terrible offensive line. It's not like Seattle's been forced into pass heavy game scripts either, right? Like Geno's balling right now. And you do just take, even if you go from the bottom tier to the next to bottom tier on offensive line, it feels like it's going to open up some things
100%.
for this offense. And this upcoming Monday is a big test. The Detroit Lions are a team that I put money on to win the most games in the regular season this year. They're a very trendy Super Bowl pick. I think they're coming out of the NFC this year. This is going to be Seattle's first real test. When you look at the Lions, what is it that they do well and where can they be beaten?
Well, obviously they're a very balanced team, both on offense and defense. I think obviously on offense, they can run the football. They're very explosive running. They have like a great 1-2 punch in Montgomery and Gibbs. Like as soon as you get tired and sore from trying to tackle David Montgomery, and he's like one of the most elusive running backs in the NFL, then you got to deal with this, like one of the most explosive guys. Like it's just a total change of pace. And I think it's really fun to watch how they mix those guys in and how they kind of do it. And they have a really good offensive line, of course. Jameson Williams gives them a whole different dimension as a passing game. And the worst part and the scariest part is they haven't really been that good yet this year. Like Jared Goff has been pretty bad, honestly. If you look at the numbers, This year compared to last year, Jared Goff has been like night and day bad in terms of when he was kept clean, which I don't think is going to continue. I think it's more like noise than anything. I think Goff, when he's kept clean throughout his certainly his Lions career, has always been really good and really consistent. And where he kind of suffers is when pressure comes, and that's, I think, the way the Seahawks can beat them is find a way to get pressure, and that's something they've done really well so far this year.
They lead the NFL in quarterback hits and quarterback pressures. Yeah, so, and I think they're second in sacks. So, like, obviously, like, I'm Bill Belichick right now. Like, get a lot of pressure. That's how you beat them. Like, I'm like this master strategy guy. It's obvious. Like, just get pressure on Jared Goff, make him make mistakes. And I think that's kind of like, I think they always also have to stop the run because Detroit is one of those teams that will just keep running it if you can't stop them. And they have two really good running backs and a really good offensive line. And also that just like keeps the ball out of your offense's hands. Like, I think right now the Seahawks offense is still the better unit. Probably it's the more experienced unit. And so, you want the Seahawks, you want the defense to be able to get off the field so the offense can go do their thing. And that was like a huge problem last year. Like, the Seahawks just couldn't get off the field, couldn't give their offense enough plays last year to like do what they really need to do to win games. And so, get pressure on Goff because he falls apart when he's pressured is the big thing. And hope that he doesn't kind of break out of this like slump he's been having when he's kept clean so far this year. I think that's just been like a big factor for them and why we haven't really seen, the Lions, like they've been solid, but they have not been. I think there's a lot of meat on the bone for them to still continue to get a lot better. Like, they're 2-1, but they aren't even playing that good a ball yet. So yeah, I think, get pressure and stop the run, and hopefully the offense can do their thing. I think that, their defense is good. Aiden Hutchinson is turning into a really good pass rusher. But they still got some holes on defense to exploit in the secondary. They're a little bit banged up. So yeah, I would just love to see them to just get to Goff and make him uncomfortable is the big thing. Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how they do that because Seattle is blitzing at a bottom 3 rate in the NFL right now, which, I mean, that's a hallmark of Mike McDonald's defenses. The way that he maneuvers his front four allows him to generate pressure. I mean, we're seeing Seattle generate pressure at a rate we haven't seen since Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill were on this team. And that's how that defense won also. They didn't blitz hardly ever.
Yeah.
And McDonald has been very choosy when he decides to blitz. There's that awesome Tyrell Dodson sack in this last game where they like hadn't blitzed all game and it was the third quarter. And then all of a sudden, just a disguised blitz, and he came free and blew it up. And it's just like, it's like picking your spots. Like on defense, that's your deep shot, right? You can't throw deep on every single play. You need the element of surprise in order to make that work. And that's how McDonald has always approached designed pressure in terms of like bringing an extra man or two. When he has blitz, they've been creative. We've seen Devin Witherspoon blitz. We've seen Reek Woolen blitz. They don't even have Nwosu yet. I'm excited to see what McDonald can do once he's back. But they have been generating pressure with their front four. It's going to be much harder for them to do, against Detroit than it has against the offensive lines that they've played so far. So that's one thing that I'm looking for. And then on the offensive side, it is really hard to run on the Lions. And Aiden Hutchinson has been, I mean, he's got some TJ Watt to him, man, in terms of just, he's one of those pass rushers. He's got every club in his bag. He can win all the different ways. And something that I think we tend to take for granted as fans is understanding like how rare an ambidextrous pass rusher is. They're not afraid to move him left side, right side, because he has the get off with both feet and his hands are so good that he's not just like going to line up against Charles Cross all game. Right. Like they can hunt Stone Forsythe with Aiden Hutchinson in this game. Yeah. And so now are you using more Pharaoh Brown to help protect? Are you using your running backs to chip and block and take them out of the pass plays? Is Noah Fant staying in line more? So that's going to be kind of a cool chess match thing. But if you can protect Geno enough, the weakness in this Lions defense has been the secondary.
Yeah.
And, the Cardinals offense has looked awesome this year, and they were not great against the Lions. The Lions looked better. They only gave up 10 points. Man, I went back and rewatched a bunch of that game. The Cardinals were really close to hitting like 4 big plays and scoring a lot of points in that game. And they were just like a tick off between Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison. Like,
I know. I remember
the points were there.
I felt like every time I looked up in that game, it was like a deep shot to Marvin Harrison that was like just broken up at the catch point. You know what I mean? Like it was so like they were so close to a couple of big plays. I believe that they're a little banged up in the secondary. I think I saw Brian Branch got. Was he the one on that really tough collision that it was like almost
with
like
McBride?
He was like lights out for a minute there. And so we'll have to see if he plays. I think Terrion Arnold was a little banged up in this last game. I haven't looked at all the injury reports yet, but as the week goes on, we'll have a better idea of that. But like they do feel like, you know, that's like their weakness, and they're a little bit banged up at the moment. So I wonder if this will turn into like one of those classic, you know, punch for punch type games where
that would be so fun. The NFL is starving for that.
God, give us something. The other thing that worries me is if the Seahawks injuries on defense
Thank you.
last for another week, that could be a problem.
I don't see how they win this game if Byron Murphy and Leonard Williams are out.
I know they would have to get pretty damn creative. Or just like be really, really good on offense, I think, if they're going to win the game in that way. So, yeah, the injury situation is going to be definitely worth monitoring this week, I think, in particular because of sort of, you know, the interior defensive line. If they're really undermanned there, this Lions offensive line could kind of like control the tempo, control the game, and keep the ball out of the Seahawks' hands.
Well, the good news is Mike McDonald is super forthcoming about the injury status of his play.
Yeah, we're going to work through it. We'll see. Yeah.
I've talked every single member of the Seahawks beat that I've talked to, and I asked them what the biggest difference is in covering the team between Pete Carroll and Mike McDonald. First answer is always injuries. He's like, basically the consensus is McDonald ain't giving a shit. Like, it's so hard to like write these, you know, reports on practice because it's like we have no idea how hurt these guys are. We're like literally waiting for the active list to come out on the morning of the game. I mean, look, who's playing.
Believe me, as like a fantasy person, it's so annoying when coaches are vague about injuries, but like from a pure football perspective, like,
wouldn't you be
like, this makes the most sense. Why would you give them any information you don't need to give them? You're not legally obligated to give them like any more information. Why would you do that? So like,
you just can't intentionally mislead. You know, the NFL makes too much money off of gambling and fantasy that they don't let you intentionally mislead, but you can be as obtuse as you want.
It's so funny too, because when you see the similarities with like Jim Harbaugh, the way that he approaches, he's like playing dumb. He's like, I'm not a doctor. I can't tell you how he's doing. He's in the training room. We'll see how it goes.
It's so good, man.
It's like, shut up, dude. You know exactly how it's going. Like, there's no way you don't know what's happening. You've been in football for your whole freaking life. You were an NFL player. Like, give me a freaking break. But, you know, I think it's just like strategically, why would you give more information than you need to? Like, it makes perfect sense.
Let me ask you this before we move on. If you were going to get $100,000 if you got the exact score right of this game on Monday, Lions, Seahawks, how much are each team? What's the score?
I'm trying to pick like a scoregami.
Oh, I like that.
26-25. I wonder if that's ever happened.
How would be 26-25? Oh God, how would we even get there? Well, like, could you imagine? It's like, it wasn't that long ago that almost half of NFL games, and some of it had to do with like the COVID years where practices were weird and all that kind of stuff. But like almost half of the NFL games saw 50 points scored. And now like the median is like 41. Like, we're legitimately seeing 2 fewer scores per game. I would just love, win or lose, I would just love to see one NFL game that's like 34-31, which isn't even that crazy, but it feels like that's almost impossible right now.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm really distracted trying to figure out how if 26-25 has ever happened. I don't know how to use this scoregami thing. Anyway, the NFL is absolutely starved for some like barn burning, you know, like, just throw some haymakers. Let's get some points going. You know, this is an era where the way that defenses are playing, it's like forcing you to dump off and play underneath and kick field goals. It's really freaking annoying. Obviously I think defense is fun to watch. Like a good defense is always fun to watch, but bad offenses are also just like it's really tough, not entertaining. It's just like ugly. So like when a defense stops a good offense, I can respect that, but some of these offenses are just really ugly and bad, and like penalties, and even like the good offenses last week were bad. The Saints were supposed to be the chosen ones. They were supposed to be the team that like is actually fun to watch every week, and then they score like one touchdown.
It was 15-12.
Just like, brutal, which might be a scoregami. I don't know.
Freaking 1930s ass football. The last thing I want to touch on while I've got you is looking at this NFC West, because coming into the season, I certainly thought it was going to be one of the most competitive and toughest divisions in football. And the folks that I talked to around the league on the show and off air, that was a shared opinion that this and like maybe the AFC East, the AFC North are divisions where it's like top to bottom, everyone's competitive. You could see multiple teams winning double-digit games, maybe 3 winning double-digit games in a division. NFC West felt like that. To me, my kind of like best realistic case scenario, looking at the schedules, was after 3 weeks, Seattle would be 2-1. And then like hopefully the Rams and the Niners each had a loss, and Seattle would be like tied for first after 3 weeks before their schedule gets tough. They're 3-0. Nobody else in the division has 2 wins. The Seahawks have a 2-game lead. And I look at the Rams, who lost the best player arguably in franchise history to retirement in the offseason. Mm-hmm. And then they've lost Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp and 4/5 of their offensive line and some of their best defensive players. And then you look at the Niners. The vibes are terrible in San Francisco. Ayuk's holding out, and Bosa is not making an impact, and McCaffrey's out now, and Debo and Ayuk. You got Juwan Jennings and Jordan Mason as the focal points of this offense. They're 1-2. The Cardinals are every bit as feisty as we thought they would be, but they don't look ready to really contend yet.
Yeah. And
so at some point, when does Seattle just become the favorite to win this division? Or am I selling the 49ers short? Like, is it more likely that the Niners get their shit together and win 11 or 12 games? Or is it more likely that maybe this is what 2017 was for the Seahawks, where you had a 4 or 5 year run of being really, really good, and then there's just too many fissures in the foundation?
I think it's probably more likely they get their shit together. As much as I would love to see them completely just collapse, I think they have too much talent, and the coaching is too strong there. But again, it's a matter of how healthy can any of these teams stay. Like if the Seahawks start suffering injuries like this, like they're gonna fall apart too. It's just, this is the nature of the NFL. It's like the healthy teams are good, and the injured teams are bad, generally speaking. Like especially late in the season, like that's how the playoffs usually go. The healthiest playoff teams usually are the ones that go the furthest in the playoffs, which is it's a weird way to think about like the NFL. It's like literally just a battle of attrition. Who has the most guys left at the end are generally the best teams, especially like the quarterback position. But I do feel like the Rams are too far gone. The whole thing with the Rams to start the season for me was like, they lost Aaron Donald. They could still be good if they don't lose any more of their key players. And then like immediately Puka Nacua got hurt. Cooper Kupp got hurt. Almost their entire offensive line is hurt. Their starting cornerback is hurt. They've just like, you can't survive that in the NFL. The margins are too slim. Like I don't care how well coached you are. I don't care how good Matt Stafford is. Like it's going to be hard to be really consistent when you lose like all your important players, essentially, other than Matt Stafford so far. And Matt Stafford, by the way, tough as hell, but he gets banged up a lot too. And so, I don't know. I think the 49ers will probably look at this as like a blip on their season, and I think they will get their shit together. But there is a tipping point at some point. If they lose 1 or 2 more guys, it's just gonna be really hard for them to compete. I think Debo will be back. we'll see about Christian McCaffrey because he's. It feels much less likely that Christian McCaffrey is going to be back anytime soon, but I think like ultimately like he's not the linchpin for that team as much as some people might see it. Like Jordan Mason's pretty good. They can get by without, they can get by without Christian McCaffrey and still compete. But yeah,
I feel like there's 4 players for the Niners who are all still playing that as long as they're healthy, they are a threat to go to the Super Bowl. Yeah. And that's Brock Purdy, who I'm just on board with him now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
he looked good in this last game, man. Like he did. He should have won them the game. Like Ronnie Bell dropped a bomb down the field that would have like basically sealed the game for them.
Yes.
And Purdy looked really good in that game. Like despite all the losses on offense, like I'm like, oh God, is he just going to completely fall apart? No, he looked really good. He like carried that offense for a large part of the day. So yeah, and he should have won them that game.
Yeah, and you look at what the Vikings look like the 85 Bears right now running Brian Flores' defense, and they absolutely dominated the Giants, which whatever, but they, put the clamps on the Houston Texans, the anointed ones. Held them to 7 yards, basically made CJ Stroud look like Bo Nix.
Dude, and made his life a living hell.
Yeah. And Purdy went out there without Debo and without McCaffrey and threw for 320 yards and like gave his team a chance to win. So I think he is good. Like I'm there.
Yeah.
Trent Williams would have gotten my MVP vote last year. As long as he's there, this offense can still wreck shop. And then Nick Bosa and Fred Warner.
Right.
I think are still at the absolute upper echelons of their positions. And I think Fred Warner is the best off-ball linebacker we've seen since peak Luke Kuechly, peak Bobby Wagner, Patrick Willis. Like he's in that mold. And so again, we're talking about like 4 all-world players that are injured, and it's like, well, they got these other 4 all-world players that are still there, and one of the best coaches in the NFL.
The collection of talent the 49ers have, despite the fact they traded multiple first-round picks for Trey Lance, is like insane. Wild. It's wild. I don't understand how they did this, but this is like the power of hitting on a few really high-impact players in the draft, and then of course like. The gamble they took to get Trent Williams because he was coming off of a cancer diagnosis, I believe, which was one of the reasons they were able to get him for the very low price that they were able to get him for in a trade. Those things paid off, and like obviously the Brock Purdy thing,
Well, they went all in on McCaffrey, and it was like you're trading like it was like 4 day 2 picks for a running back. He's the best running back, but still, that's what you're doing. And it's like, that was transformative. Yeah, absolutely. And we haven't even mentioned Dre Greenlaw, who will be back, and Talise Hufanga, who will be back. These are all pro quality players.
Plus, you still have Shanahan. Shanahan feels like almost like a tragic character at this point in time, but like he still can call the hell out of a game and like just make a life a living hell for defenders and middle of the field defenders. And so, I don't know. I'm not counting out the 49ers even remotely. Obviously, it's a really rough start for them, but I still think they'll be good. By the way, 26-25 was a scoregami in 2020. Miami beat Las Vegas 26-25.
Who could forget that one?
Yeah.
I'm so glad I had an open feedback loop going ever since he started looking to see if 26-25 was a scorigami. I'm glad.
Wait a minute.
Glad we could put a bow on that.
Maybe it wasn't actually. There was 1 second left in the fourth quarter. I'll have to look and see if that game actually finished that way. But yeah,
for me, it's one of those things where the NFC West appears to be an extremely well coached division. Also, like I think top to bottom, you have really good quarterback play, and top to bottom, it appears you have really good coaching. Like. For all the jokes we made about Rich Gannon, when he first took over and some of his kind of like cringy public facing stuff, he seems to be very ready to be an NFL head coach. And I'd be excited if I was a Cardinals fan. And then McVay and Shanahan, they're other Rushmore guys in the NFL. And so far, Mike McDonald appears to have the goods too. So it's way, way, way too early to have any foregone conclusions in this division. Mm-hmm. But what a blessing that Seattle has a 2-game cushion going into all of these. And it actually feels like they could beat the Rams and the 49ers this year.
Yeah, for sure. When you look around the NFL, like the Seahawks fans, like, you should be just very happy that they were able to get through these games that they should win, and they did win, because this cushion they've built is like really going to be really important. I mean, in the back, the other teams in this division, like, their backs are against the wall already, essentially, the Rams and the 49ers. I know the Cardinals, I think they'll be plucky this year, but I'm with you. I don't think they're quite, built to be a real true contender this year. But yeah, man, all the good things. I'm feeling really good so far. Like, I agree with you about the coaching. I think every team has pretty good coaching in this division. Yeah.
And I remember when the Seahawks won the division at 7-9, and I think it is good if you have hopes of someday within the current iteration of your team competing for a Super Bowl. I think it's a benefit to come out of a competitive division. I think it's important to climb that mountain within your own division to really feel prepared to go beat playoff caliber teams. And so I expect, the Rams, I agree with you. I think they just might be too far gone. They just don't have the reinforcements.
How did they win that game? I don't know.
I have no idea. Stafford and McVay, man.
Yeah.
They got some magic, those two, for sure.
Right.
Listen, Danny, I know you've been balls to the wall all day with your recapping the entire NFL. I know you got your own show. Man, I just love talking ball with you. Thank you for giving me a chance to do that with you here on the show.
Of course, man. Appreciate it. This is I'm honored to be on at this point in the Seahawks season. It's like super exciting, and I'm happy to be talking about wins.
That makes it more fun too.
Yeah.
I know we mentioned it before, but before I let you go, just let everyone listening know, most of whom are already big fans of yours, but for those who may not be yet, let them know where they can get more of you.
The Ringer Fantasy Football Show, which we have 4 shows a week during the NFL season, and then turns into a draft show during the off season. So go check that out.
My single favorite podcast.
Thank you. And yeah, just check us out at The Ringer. We have our weekly fantasy rankings up at theringer.com as well.
And make sure you follow him on Twitter at Danny B. Kelly as well. He will make you smarter and make you laugh while he does it. Thank you again, Danny.
Thank you, man.
As always, you can find me on social media as well. I am at Jacson Bevins. That's Jacson. Remember that no K is okay when spelling my name. Our dearly departed Mike is also on Twitter at Mike Barwin, and the show itself is at Cigar Thoughts. You can catch full video episodes on our YouTube channel at Cigar Thoughts, and find the rest of our socials at cigarthoughtsnfl.com. As mentioned previously, this episode is brought to you by Glenfiddich Premium Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. Y'all know I'm a huge fan of their lineup, and we are thrilled to have them on board as a sponsor of the show. If you're watching on YouTube, you see me enjoying a glass, their French Oak 16, which has a bit of a vanilla profile to it that I really like. And one of the great things about a great Scotch is how well it plays with a good cigar. So once again, we do have our own special releases of cigars that you can purchase at a terrific price as a listener of the show. The release of these Cigar Thought Stogies has been successful enough for us to continue offering them for the low price of $149. That's right, only $149 for a bundle of 10. As many of you know, we partnered with one of the most prestigious cigar manufacturers in the world to release these official Cigar Thought cigars, which you can order directly from cigarthoughtsnfl.com. Just follow the link on the show page to get these easy-to-smoke stogies rolled with 13-year aged premium Dominican tobacco leaf, or hit us up on Twitter or Instagram, and we'll send you the details directly. The cigars come with a Bovita humidification pack and a Mylar storage bag to make sure they stay fresh whether you have a humidor or not. Of course, you can listen to this show and read every article at fieldgoals.com. My post-game write-up from last night is up there right now. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and you like the show, drop us a 5-star rating and leave a quick review. Thank you to all of y'all listening for your continued support of the show. We know that you've only got so much time for podcasts in your life, and it's an honor to be a part of that for y'all. Please know that by sharing this show on social media and with your friends, you give us the juice to keep making this happen. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, onwards and upwards, my friends.